Welcome to Confessions of an Entrepreneur, powered by RG. My name is Carl Swansbury, and I am thrilled today to welcome Nigel Mills onto my podcast. Nigel, as a fellow chartered accountant who qualified with Pricewaterhouse in the 80s, left Pricewaterhouse to buy, scale, and in turn sell an independent convenience store business, which he sold to Tesco PLC for millions of pounds. After selling his business to Tesco, Nigel decided to set up, develop, internationalize, and in turn sell to Timber the brilliantly profiled, award-winning The Lakes Distillery here in the northeast of England. Nigel was one of the founders of the Entrepreneurs Forum and today is a trusted advisor, mentor, investor, and high-profile businessman. I'm really looking forward today to spending a bit of time with Nigel to understand some of the highs, the lows, the opportunities that Nigel has perhaps been introduced to and has exploited, some of the things that perhaps on reflection he would have done differently were he to have his time again, and of course to perhaps really get to the nub of why Nigel has proven to be highly successful throughout his career to this point. For sure, I think this podcast is going to be educational, informative, and thought-provoking, so I'm delighted you, our viewers, can be with us. Nigel, can I just start by thanking you for appearing today on my Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcast. It's absolutely brilliant that you've agreed to spend some time with me on my podcast.
No, it's a real pleasure, and thank you for asking me.
Pleasure. So as a fellow chartered accountant, it would be brilliant, Nigel, if we could go right back to the beginning and just understand a little bit about why you decided to join PwC to study as a chartered accountant.
Well, I was born in St Mary's Hospital, which is now a lovely block of flats in Newcastle. Brought up in Tynemouth at the coast. Went to King's School at Tynemouth, which was quite an entrepreneurial school. A lot of the kids that I went to school with, their parents had their own businesses with the trawlers at the Fish Quay and the shipbuilding business and things like that. So I grew up in that sort of environment. My father worked for his father. They had a chain of news agents. And actually I played a lot of golf. So what I really wanted to be was a golf professional. However, in 1972, my grandfather died of a heart attack. And he died intestate, which in those days meant that the majority of your money then went to the government. And he had not taken any financial planning. And effectively, the family lost its wealth. That didn't really affect me. I was at school. I would be at that age about 14. But obviously it affected my father and my mother and the family more widely. The business was sold. My father stayed on as a consultant managing director. But I was really upset, I guess, in some respects, that the family had lost something that they worked for many, many years, simply because they hadn't taken the proper advice. But it was actually my father that said to me, I want you to become an accountant. I academically was sort of average. I was more interested in sport. I was more interested in competing. That's what I love to do. So I was told that I have to get my O-levels, A-levels, go to university, and after that I could do what I want. So that's what I did. So did the O-levels, A-levels, went to Lancaster University, studied economics, accountancy, and law, had 3 fabulous years drinking real ale and playing golf up and down the West Coast. Even saw Blondie in concert. The Blondie and a band came to Lancaster. That was a big thing. And the Police. So that was wonderful. And then, year before I graduated, I went for 2 interviews. One with Pete Marwick, and the other one with Price Waterhouse, as it was known then. I passed the interview with Price Waterhouse and was offered a job. I didn't pass the interview with Pete Marwick. They thought that I wasn't intelligent enough, which was interesting. Went back to university, got a sportsman scholarship at degree 2-2, and then started with Price Waterhouse in September 1980.
Wow. And there's a few things, Nigel, you've said in there I'd love to reflect on. So you mentioned that it was your father who encouraged you / directed you to become an accountant. Why was that, bearing in mind, of course, your father himself?
My father did national service in Canada, and he was really interested in geology. And he wanted to be a geologist. And at one stage, we had our bags as a family packed to go to Canada.
Oh, wow.
Where he got a job with one of the oil companies there. But when my grandfather fell ill the first time, he was the eldest son, so he ended up having to go into the family business to run the family business, as was expected in those days. So, the life could have been very, very different if it hadn't been for that. On the other side of my family, my grandfather was a coal miner. And, in those days, my father worked very hard, and I was effectively brought up with my mother and my grandmother in that environment. And the sense of community, the sense of or the need for value, for money, living off a very, very limited income, all of those things help, I guess, shape you when you're younger.
And you mentioned that you went to Lancaster University. Was there a particular reason why?
Yeah, I didn't get the grades to go into York University because I wanted to play at Fulford,
Yeah.
golf club. So I went to clearing one morning, ended up with a place at Lancaster, and landed on my feet, because Lancaster University at that stage was one of the new red brick universities. And I think it was only 12 years old at that stage, but it had a very, very good economics and accountancy department, which has since gone on from strength to strength. So, yeah, I fell on my feet there, which was really good.
And obviously, when you joined Price Waterhouse, as was then, did you know that everything you were doing then was in anticipation of running the family business? Was that a given?
Well, the family business was gone. My father ran it on behalf of the people who bought it, which was actually Thompson Regional Newspapers, which was the Journal and the Chronicle in those days. I always wanted to run my own business. I saw accountancy, and when you train as an accountant, as you know, you work in audit, so you go into lots of different companies, and you get to see how those companies, how their business models work. And one of the things I think I'm quite good at is trying to work out what the strengths and weaknesses are of companies and business models. And so that training was absolutely invaluable. And of course, back in the 80s, you still had a lot of industry, and Price Waterhouse at that stage, ICI was one of their major clients in the Northeast, and it was invaluable in terms of understanding business models, but also in terms of seeing how different management styles worked, what they got right, what they got wrong. And, I'm always grateful from that. And the other thing, of course, the good thing about being an accountant is that, and not all accountants can do this, but when you see a set of numbers, they tell a story. And if you can read that story, it is invaluable. A lot of people produce the numbers, but don't really understand what the numbers are telling them, because you have to put them into context with the business model, and you have to put them into context with the business that you are, or the industry that you're operating in. So, fortunately, I always believed I could do that. So that was very good. Price Waterhouse was, as you said before, one of the largest accountancy practices in the world. It was very, very demanding in terms of you had to work and get the job done to a very high standard very quickly. At the same time, you had to study. And then, we used to go on 6-week cramming courses, which were just incredibly intense, and a lot of bright guys fell by the wayside because they couldn't cope with the pressure of having to work during the day, not so much study at night, but then reset and go through those 6 weeks
Absolutely.
of intense pressure. And at the end of those 6 weeks, you had 5 3-hour exams. And when I took those exams, you had to pass all 5 simultaneously. Otherwise, you resat all 5. The year I qualified, they changed it so that if you failed one, you resat one. But the other pressure was that if you failed, you didn't get your pay rise, you didn't get your promotion, so therefore you didn't move up the hierarchy. And that would endanger your potential future at Pricewaterhouse. So fantastic training, a lot of pressure, but to learn to cope with that has been absolutely invaluable over the years.
Well, I mean, life is just demanding, isn't it? And pressure is continual. And of course, nowadays, people talk more openly about perhaps being overexerted. There's a continual discussion about work-life balance, isn't there? But I guess later we'll talk about what one needs to do to achieve significant success. But the reality is hard work is assumed, right?
Well, hard work. I think you also have to have another channel. I mean, I was very lucky because of my passion for sport, and I played golf. That would give you a release.
Yes.
It was another challenge. But it was a different challenge. It got you out in the fresh air. And, for a few hours you could escape from the pressures at work. I think it's important to have that. And also I had a very supportive family.
Yes.
And that's key as well. I had a family that were very ambitious for their kids. More so after the business was sold. And, my parents put me through a private education, which was incredibly expensive. And they made lots of sacrifices for that. So, having the distraction of sport, having a very supportive family, all of those are some of the things that can help you get through life in the future.
Just to ask, you mentioned there that, of course, you went to a private school and you were privately educated, which, as you say, is such a fortunate gift to have been given. Do you think that did result in you feeling under pressure to succeed because of the investment that your parents made in your education?
Partly, but I just think I was just inherently competitive. And
Yes.
I grew up in an environment, in the 60s and 70s where everybody was expected to be more successful than their parents. And it wasn't unusual to have that ambition. It wasn't unusual to have a bigger house, to have a bigger car, to have more holidays or whatever else. That was the norm for me, certainly in the environment I grew up in. I remember at a party my parents gave me, and somebody said to me, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to pay as little tax as possible when I'm older. He said, no. He said, you want to pay the most tax because then you've really made some money.
Well, it's the
And I thought,
tax number that counts, right?
well, yeah, and I thought that was an amazing thing for him to say. But that gives you a feel for the ambition of that time. There were obviously barriers, but the consensus was if you work hard, if you put your head down, you can do well, and you can have the things that you perhaps desire. Whether the right things in today's world is debatable, but certainly you grew up in an environment that was competitive, that was ambitious, and that wasn't unusual.
And obviously, when you were very young, as you say, all you could see was your father running the family business alongside your grandfather. Obviously, when your grandfather sadly passed, very quickly things changed and the family business was no more. So when you joined Pricewaterhouse, you said that your motivation was to find yourself in business. Did you know what business you may find yourself in then, or was it actually all about qualifying and then seeing what options opened up?
No, I really wanted to go back into the news agency business. I felt that the family had the connections, it had the expertise. It was a business model that I understood, because in those days, if you sold newspapers and magazines, you had effectively a monopoly within a
That
certain
locality.
radius, locality. And basically what happened was that people would come every day, buy the paper, buy a magazine. You could then generate big footfall, and you could sell other things to them. So it was a fairly simple business model. It was one that was protected by legislation, and I knew something about it. So that was always my ambition, to perhaps look at that. But at the same time, again, you get through accountancy and through audit, you get that variety of different businesses that you're constantly exposed to.
Yes.
So in London, it was Thorn EMI I was involved with, and Metalbox, and huge companies. And then Northeast, it was everything from Phoenix to Teesland Investments, a property company in Teesside. So you do get a great cross section of experience in different businesses. But yeah, if what I would love to have done, well, what I the back of my mind wanted to do was to to rebuild the family business.
So obviously you qualified as an accountant with Pricewaterhouse.
Yeah.
What then was important in helping you to decide, Nigel, what came next?
Well, it was opportunity. I was asked if I wanted to work down in London. I think I qualified in '84. I think it was '84. So I thought, well, that'd be really interesting, because if you're going to raise money in the future, and those are the days when the stock market and conglomerates were the way that you built businesses, by floating, by using your shares to buy businesses rather than cash. And that's subsequently changed, but in those days, that was the way you did it. So going to the city for me was a great experience. So packed my bags, went to London in '84, and worked for Pricewaterhouse there. And I worked for a section of Pricewaterhouse called Group 4, which were really ambitious, really intense, part of the audit group. And then ended up working all around London, manufacturing and lots of different businesses, but also got a feel for the way the city works, and got a feel for the geography of London. So if you went to London, you weren't a stranger, you weren't for somebody there. So I was there for 2 years. Interestingly, the 2 years I was there was the time of the miners' strikes,
Okay.
which absolutely decimated the Northeast. And it was a power struggle between Arthur Scargill and Margaret Thatcher. But I missed that. I missed that in the Northeast. And I was down in London. It was just ahead of Big Bang in London. And everything was booming. And everybody was excited about the market becoming deregulated and all the jobs and all the rest of it. So, and then whilst I was down there, family friends said that they were selling their news agency business, because one of the brothers had died. They had got a price for that business, which back in '85 was £360,000, which in today's money is just over £1 million.
Yeah.
And the business was loss making. So, and it was goodwill. The things that you can't borrow against normally. And I teamed up with my father's accountants at the time, Rainbow Gillespie, who were in Jesmond, and a guy called Philip Upton, who was a trainee and qualified at Rainbow Gillespie. And we put a business plan together to buy these businesses. And I remember one day we went to 8 separate banks, and in those days there were 8 separate banks. There aren't nowadays. And Philip came with me, and we pitched to 8 banks, and they all said no. because you were buying goodwill. It was loss making. What I had managed to do from the age of 16 is I'd built up a small property company through my father's bank manager connection and things like that. So I was able to mortgage that. I was able to mortgage my parents' house. I was able to mortgage my grandparents' house, which when I look back was incredible support. Again, there's support from the family. But I also had a mentor, a solicitor called Jeffrey Lurie. And his family had known my family for a few generations. And I remember we were rejected, and I had 2/3 of the money, but I needed 120,000 to get the deal over the line. He went with me to see a bank manager at Midland Bank, as it was then, which became HSBC. The manager said to Jeffrey Lurie, would you back this man? And Jeffrey Lurie said, yes, I would. And he said, okay, that's good enough for me. I'll lend you the last piece. But he wouldn't lend me any money for the stock. So I had to go back to the person selling the business and said, look, I can pay you the 360,000, but I can't pay you for the stock on day one. Can you give me 3 months to accumulate the creditors, and then I'll pay you? And he said, yes. So that's how we got the deal over the line. So then I resigned from Pricewaterhouse.
And at what level were you at then, Nigel?
I was assistant manager, about to become a manager.
So relatively junior to be buying a business, yeah? If I think about sort of assistant managers / managers I know today in Big Four, very few of them would have the ability, the confidence, the network, the capital to go buy a business. So presumably everyone around you must have been somewhat surprised at the quite material decisions you were making at that time in your career.
Yes, and I was doing well at Pricewaterhouse.
Yeah,
I was making the promotions, getting the pay rises. I think I mentioned earlier that I met a former colleague in London about 6 or 7 years ago when I was trying to raise money for the Lakes Distillery, and we were trying to float it. And he said to me, are you Nigel Mills from Group 4 Pricewaterhouse? I said, yes. And he said, we all thought you were bloody mad when you left. and that took me back quite a lot. And then the investment bank I was with, said, came to my rescue and said, well, he hasn't done too bad.
Well, there you are. but let me ask a question. So at that time, and it's difficult sometimes to go back, but I'm sure you can remember the moment. Was it really easy for you to resign? And by that I mean, were you absolutely certain that buying this independent news agency business was your next stepping stone toward business success? Or actually, were you really anxious? Were you very cautious? Was it a really difficult decision?
I was, how old would I be? I was 27 years old. I think I had the confidence of youth, and I hadn't failed before at anything. And I think that confidence, the support of the family, the confidence in myself, and I rationalized that if I lost this money, I would simply go back into accountancy and just make it. But I had
time on your side.
I had time on my side. I had a professional qualification. I had a good reputation. When I resigned from Pricewaterhouse, they said to me, well, look, we understand what you're doing. If it doesn't work out, we'll keep your job open for a year.
How did you feel about sort of having to, cap in hand, go to your family and seek their financial support? Because again, that's not something that everyone would choose to do / have the ability to do, Nigel.
Well, they've always supported me, so it was normal. And they understood what I was trying to do, and they supported that. So we had a common purpose, for want of a better word. But it was interesting because we got the deal over the line. 1st of February, 1986. We started, and the shops that we bought were in some of the more challenged areas of Newcastle. So in Benwell, Brunswick, Byker, where these sort of news agency businesses did well. But in the first year, well, two things happened. One, I came back to the Northeast, and I couldn't believe how down the area was after the miners' strike.
Yes.
Because by that stage it was concluded, but the coal mines are starting to shut down. Obviously the shipyards were closing down. The steel works in concert were closing down. So I'd moved from a very prosperous, booming environment in London to suddenly this area that was once a powerhouse and now is going through one of the biggest transitions it would ever see. And that was a shock. And then we got these shops, and we almost went bust in the first year because nearly every week we had a break-in.
Wow.
Because people wanted to steal the cigarettes because of the form of currency. And break-ins were common because of the economic environment that this area was suffering from at the time. So we then had a big decision to make. I either put roller shutters and proper alarms on the businesses, or we go bust. But I didn't have the money to do that. But I did it anyway because we were going to go bust.
The only option.
And that stopped the majority of the break-ins, and that allowed us to crawl through that first year. Yes. And I think we made a profit of £30,000, which was amazing, which in today's money would be about £100,000. And I remember going to my mentor and said, "Oh, we made a profit the first year." And he said, "Well, how much?" I said, £30,000. He said, "Is that all?" I thought, "Oh, okay." Must try harder.
Yeah, maybe a bit of tough love is what he was giving you.
Yeah, he was.
I guess deeper again, yeah.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
And save for roller shutters and alarms to secure the premises, Nigel, how did you turn around a loss-making business into a profitable business in 12 months? What particular things did you focus on?
The quality of the management, the product range within the store, we expanded it, and also the business that we bought, their accounting records and books weren't very good. So,
Right.
but that's one thing that we did do well, really well. And so therefore we're able to manage the business better, manage the margins, manage the costs, and just run them properly.
Yes.
They'd been very good businesses in the past. They'd been run down through the death of one of the brothers who ran the business. Clearly that was a huge distraction for the family. So I'm not blaming them in any way.
No, of course.
But we were picking up, something which had been neglected.
Okay. And obviously the journey that you will have gone through from year one to the point in time where you had built a significant business was one of many years. But in the sort of last year that you owned the business, can you just give me a sense as to the scale of the business you had built, please, Nigel?
Well, we, over 25 years, it had 170 million going through the tills and about 2,000 employees.
Wow.
So it was taking just over 3.5 million a week. But that was split between products, which was roughly £1.5 million, and £2 million, £2 million in service income. So the national lottery, utility payments and things like that. So I remember the first year's turnover was 2 million. Well, when we sold it, we turned over that in 5 days.
Wow.
So it was a big, big change. And during that period, we had to reinvent the business 3 times.
Yeah.
So, we went from newsagents in 1994, the change in government legislation almost killed us. Because in 94, the Monopolies and Mergers Commission decided they would deregulate the newspaper and magazine market. So anybody could sell newspapers and magazine. The other thing in 1994 was that they opened Sunday trading. So we lost our sole trading position on Sundays to the supermarkets and the garage forecourts and things like that. So those 2 things knocked our turnover by 40% and just killed the profit. So we went from profit to loss. The thing that saved us was the National Lottery, which was in 1994. So we managed to get the National Lottery into every single shop, which put back the profit that we'd lost from the underlying core business. So that then changed the business from, newspapers to news and services, including some post offices. And we also then had off licenses, and then in 2003, when Tesco's brought in Tesco Express, which was on the Sunday trading laws as well, that defined what a modern day convenience store would look like, which is 3,000 square feet. which we slowly grew into as a business. So we went into bigger shops and we offered more food and drink. And then in 2003, when Tesco Express was launched proper, that defined the modern convenience store, and we reinvented ourselves again with a much greater focus on fresh and chilled food and ambient food. So we went through 3 colossal changes, and each time we went through those changes, we effectively had to rebuy the business because you were investing millions. The IT systems we put in at the turn of the century was £2.5 million. For a private business, that's a lot of investment. And it is investment that can add value, because it did add value. We really had a good hold on our margins, really good hold on our margins. But you have to keep investing, keep investing, keep investing, keep investing. So you make a good living out of it. It's fantastic and exciting building a business, but you've got to also cope with the highs and the lows. And you've also got to keep reinventing your business all the time, because the world never stops spinning, competition never stops, and it's an expensive thing to do.
And obviously you've mentioned a number of material changes which completely undermined the business model, which required change. How possible has it been for you over that journey to anticipate change versus respond to change when it's been introduced?
Well, in all the businesses I've been involved with, I always used to go and meet our competitors. And I was very lucky that the businesses I have been involved with, people are willing to talk to me, to share. I mean, we all compete at the sharp end,
Yes.
but the back end people share. I also was on the board and helped shape industry representative bodies, which allows you to meet other people, but also those representative bodies tend to talk to government, because there's government legislation that can have such a devastating effect on your business. And so when the government are considering things like minimum wage and other things which really affect you directly, you have a little bit of a voice through trade associations. So how were we able to anticipate that? I think by networking, by learning from others, and being involved with trade associations, so that if we had a voice with the legislators, and if we couldn't affect the outcome, at least we understood better what the potential challenges were following that change, so we could anticipate that and change the business going forward. So we moved from a position where we became victim of change to actually making change part of the norm in our business.
Yes. And of course, as a relatively young businessman, as a qualified accountant at Pricewaterhouse, you went from buying this small, very regionally focused news agency business to being CEO of a very large, somewhat different business. And how did you, as a entrepreneur and as a CEO, make sure you were developing, learning, and becoming a better version of you as the business scaled? Did you have any formal coaching or mentoring, Nigel, or were you just learning on the job?
No, I was very lucky in that when we started the business, I had 2 mentors. One was my father, which was incredibly helpful because he had a great reputation in the industry. And it meant that, as a startup, we got credit from our major suppliers straight away. So that helped an awful lot. But my father left after about 3 years. He retired. I also had another mentor, Jeffrey Lurvy, that I mentioned. And, in the first 10 or 12 years, I used to talk through every major decision with him. And then meeting my peers in industry and networking, that all helped. But it you're never born with all the answers. And if you're the leader of a business, everybody looks to you for the answers. So who do you look to help you with those very, very difficult decisions? And where I shared with mentors and others and considered those decisions, I probably made better decisions. When I tried to go it alone, self-confidence, too much self-confidence perhaps, I didn't make such good decisions,
Mm.
and it cost me. Nowadays, I think it's far more recognized, especially in large companies, where the management, the up-and-coming management are coached, are trained, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the norm. And it was interesting. I've just written an article for the Entrepreneurs Forum magazine about switching the role from having two roles in the business. One is the CEO that looks to strategy and the future of the business, and the other is the managing director that basically manages the process and manages the everyday part of the business. And when you are both, inevitably, you don't do as good a job as you could in both roles, and unless you split them. So it's like everything. I'm a better CEO now than I was 40 odd years ago because I've learned the hard way. If you can find the right mentors, if you can find the right coaches, and there are coaching organizations out there, I would urge people to do that because you need to develop your business, but also you need to develop yourself.
Yeah. And it's interesting the distinction you draw between the managing director, which is a manager focused on the here and now,
Yeah.
versus the leader, which is the CEO. And those are two completely different individuals who do need to bring something different to a business. And often in a small privately owned business, those roles are one and the same, aren't they?
Well, inevitably they are. And, it's taken me a lot of years to work out what is the optimum business structure, really.
Yes.
And if you are scaling a business, to scale it in terms of strategy, acquisition, development, whatever, is a job in itself. But somebody needs to look after the day-to-day business, to motivate and lead the people who are employed in the business. So, that was something that I learned the hard way, basically.
And during the sort of 25 years journey, did you self-finance the growth and development of the business, or did you bring third-party capital in, Nigel?
No, we from 1996, I think it was. I mean, we're looking to grow, and there's only so much debt that you can take on board, and based on what the bank's appetite is, how your financial performance is, and we were making some good money, but we also borrowed. So when the enterprise investment scheme came into being in the mid-90s, we used that to fund growth. So we set up new companies, EIS, SEIS registered, brought in investors, matched, the bank would match the amount of equity we brought in, and then we bought half a dozen or a dozen stores or whatever. So we expanded using that tax driven model.
Interesting. And were those greenfield sites, or were these
No,
established agents?
these were existing businesses. So what we did was we bought effectively cash flow. We developed them, put our enhanced buying power and everything else in there, which improved margins, put them into our management structure, and it was just buy and build, buy and build.
Understand. So, at what point did you, as the sort of founder of the business that you bought and developed and major shareholder, at what point did you decide to start thinking about de-risking personally? Because of course a lot of blood, sweat and tears went into that business over 25 years. So when did you start thinking about taking some value off for you?
Well, we sold the business eventually in March 2011, and from about 2006, 2007 onwards, we'd reinvented the business 3 times, and I explained how costly that was. So each time you were borrowing more, you were paying off debt, but then you were borrowing again to fund that change, which kept you in the game and kept you going forward in terms of sales and profitability, but not a significant difference. It was evolution rather than revolution.
Right. Yeah.
In terms of growth. And a lot of my peers were then being sold to the major multiples, because when Tesco Express was developed or launched in 2003, Sainsbury's came into the convenience store market, Morrison's looked at it, all the major supermarket chains suddenly recognized that this was an opportunity to grow their businesses, but also to lock in their customers, to make sure that they didn't shop at Tesco's for their small shop and Sainsbury's for their large shop. So one by one, all of my peers were sold, and we were the largest independent left in the UK.
Wow. Okay.
And and every time a brand opened up next to one of our stores, we would see our turnover go down by about 40%.
Wow, that's significant.
So it was effectively death by 1,000 cuts.
Mm.
And there was nothing I could do with that. You know, Sainsbury's are Sainsbury's, Tesco's Tesco, Asda's Asda. Huge companies, very, very efficient, trusted brands by the consumer compared to an independent. So at that stage, I started looking for an exit because I felt I'd taken the business as far as I possibly could. And as it turned out, it took us 5 years to find a suitable exit. And that happened in August. It was August 2009, I think. I got a phone call from the managing director of One Stop, which was the small convenience store division of Tesco, saying they wanted to expand. Our stores, they were based in Birmingham. Our stores in terms of the north and also where we were involved south were almost a perfect fit for them. They had central warehouses. Their lorries in terms of delivery was just, our business was perfect for them. So I actually deliberated for about 6 months. I don't know why, but I did. I think we must have been doing quite well at that time. And then eventually picked up the phone and said, okay, let's start talking. And then it took 15 months to negotiate the deal and to get out.
Wow. Okay.
Which was a lesson in itself. And until you've actually built a business, developed it, and then exited, I don't think you fully understand the life cycle of a business. They're very different stages in business development, and they require different skills, and they have different pressures as well.
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned that from when you first started thinking about selling the business to selling the business, it was a 5-year journey.
Yeah.
Why was it that long? Is it because you were having to come to terms with wanting to sell the business? Or is it because actually you weren't able to get traction with the right counterparty early?
I think it was because we were inherently still a news agency model.
Okay.
And we had a large part of our business was newspapers and magazines, which was our legacy. And we also still did home news delivery, which was an important part of our business. So for the co-op and for Sainsbury's and people like that, that wasn't what they did.
Yes.
So our stores weren't a fit for them. Ironically, despite employing several professional firms to find a buyer, nobody hit on One Stop.
Wow.
I know.
Quite staggering. Because
Which was
it sounds like an obvious buyer based on what you kindly showed.
Absolutely. And
why do you think that was, therefore, on reflection?
Because perhaps they didn't realize how big One Stop was, or they didn't realize that Tesco had such a large regional, small store, convenience store. I don't know. It took the MD to ring me up.
Wow.
But during that period, it was a worry. You've built up this business, it's profitable. You've invested heavily in it. You've invested 20 odd years of your life in it, and you want out because coming back to your earlier point, to what extent could you anticipate change? Well, that was exactly one of those things we anticipated. So, and once you decide to come out of a business, you lose the enthusiasm and passion for it. So then suddenly work goes from being fun to being a bit of a chore.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an interesting change as well. So, but as it turned out, we got there in the end.
Yeah, well, congratulations. And it's interesting because clearly when you are building a business, your sole focus should be the business you are creating. And you shouldn't really be distracted by the likely acquirer and what they would like the business to look like for them to want to buy it. That said, however, I do think the one thing a lot of founder CEOs could benefit from doing is appreciating early actually where their business fits in the market, and as a consequence, who will see value in it, just so that when you get to the inflection point, there are buyers who see value in the business you are building.
Yes, and I think that, the mistake we made was that we enjoyed the ride so much that we invested for the wrong reasons,
Yes, I respect
and we didn't do the maths
that.
in terms of return on capital that we should have done. And what we didn't do, we focused on scale, thinking that would add value, and actually it did in the end. I mean, we got a very good price from Tesco's, which was fantastic. But when you sell a business and you reflect on the things you got right, the things you got wrong, and it's interesting to do that. Some of the business decisions we made were wrong in terms of adding value to the business. So with hindsight, we shouldn't have made those decisions.
And to be specific, Nigel, what things on reflection do you feel you shouldn't have done in pursuit of maximization of equity value?
Yeah. We bought businesses in the wrong locations.
Right. Okay.
We kept investing in loss-making stores instead of exiting. And probably that was the main one. You have a portfolio of shops. Some of them have an emotional attachment because you've had them a lot of years. You believe that you can turn them round when they start going backwards, but retail is like a shifting sea. And if the footfall goes away from a site or things change, no matter what you do, you can't change it on your own.
Yes.
So at that point, it's better to cut and run to get out and move on to the next project rather than literally trying to, flog a dead horse, for want of a better expression. So, those are the mistakes. We spend too much time trying to turn the tide back and not enough time in chasing the future, I guess.
Albeit these things aren't binary, and as you say, perhaps economically on reflection, making sharper decisions sooner may have paid. But of course, I'm sure the reason you didn't do some of the things you've said you could have done were probably as a result of the stakeholders in and around the business. I'm sure some of your employees were loyal, long-standing employees, and you were doing morally and culturally what felt right, even though economically perhaps it diluted value to some degree.
Yeah, and the other thing that we didn't do, or I didn't do in that particular business, was we hadn't set out a clear strategy. In other words, the vision was to grow the business.
Yes.
Next year we'd be bigger, next year we'd be bigger, next year we'd be bigger. Okay, so what is the strategy? What is the vision? How are you going to deliver that vision? And what are the key objectives? And coming back to the coaching and the mentoring and things like that, you need these tools in your box to be able to take all of your thoughts and ambitions and basically codify them.
Yes.
One, so you better understand them, but more importantly, you can share that with the team. They can buy in or otherwise to that. And then you all start to go in the same direction.
That's right.
Otherwise, you're leading and the danger is that you leave people behind. And I've made that mistake.
So obviously you sold the business successfully to Tesco, which is a fantastic achievement. What did you see as the level of involvement you were likely to have post-selling your shares to Tesco?
There was none. I mean, I knew that.
So literally sold shares on Friday and disappeared 5 p.m. same day. Is that?
Yeah, it was a little more complex than that. We had because we had 13 different companies, and one of the reasons for that were the EIS companies.
Sure.
And also what had happened was that over the years, if one bank said no, I'd go to another bank, set another company up, and, we'd expand that way. So we had a very, very complex group structure, which ought to have been simplified before we went to market. I think that's one of the things that put people off. And as a result, when we agreed to sell, we were dealing with the M&A department of Tesco PLC. At that time, they were making 4 billion profit. They were a global business, but for some reason, the lady that was in charge of the deal on Tesco had a zero tolerance to risk. This is a £20 million deal on a company making $4 billion.
Yeah.
That were global. You know, why worry about every penny, and literally every penny? So the time that it took to do the deal was around about, well, we started in February, we signed the deal in December, and because of the scale of Tesco, they were in danger of being referred to the Monopolies and Mergers Commission, and the deal could be blocked. And I recognized that before we agreed to sell to them. And they said, oh, we've done all our homework. Everything's good. This was early 2010. When we signed the deal, at that point, you tell your employees, you tell your suppliers. At that point, you're no longer in charge of your business because you've sold them. And sure enough, we ended up in the Monopolies and Mergers Commission. And what I'd done on day one, I said, look, if we end up in this, you have to pay all the legal fees. It's your responsibility to get us through this. And I'm so glad I did, because when you're talking about legal costs in this government body, it's eye-watering. In fact, the bill that Tesco got was eye-watering for them, and they're a major, major company. But anyway, what happened was that we were held in limbo for 3 months. And you go through a process whereby the clock stops and starts. So we would submit information to Monopolies and Mergers and say, look, it's not anti-competitive. Their stores are nowhere near our stores. And we'd map it all out, and then they would look at it and come back with challenges, and they would stop the clock. So, and you have 6 weeks in terms of time, a bit like chess where you stop and start the clock. And if you don't resolve it within 6 weeks, it goes to public inquiry. And our business, when I started to sell, we were growing at 5%. By the time I signed the deal in December, our sales were declining by 5%. Why? Because I'd spent nearly a year in solicitors' offices. Distraction. So your business starts going backwards. You've agreed to sell. Your suppliers no longer want to talk to you. They want to talk to Tesco's. So that was a horrendous period. And actually, to get the deal over the line, we had to keep around about 5 or 6 shops. And we found out what the solution was through back channels, which is what normally happens with government departments. And we eventually did the deal. And then it took me about 18 months to sell off the rump of the business. So that was an amazing experience. Not one that I really wanted, but again, another experience that you go through, another feather in your cap.
Consents and approvals, if we just categorize it as that, are so important in M&A transactions, right?
And the government nearly killed me in 94, and then they nearly killed me in 2011.
Yeah, well, they are consistent, Nigel, at that, for sure. So let me ask then, with one eye on time. So obviously, the story you've shared, which is a 25-year journey, is just so significant. And of course, what you were exposed to, what you learned, what you encountered, and fundamentally what you achieved, of course, you carry with you. So once you sold the business you built, what did you then decide you would do with the time that you were given back? Because I guess for the 25 years prior, your sole focus would have been one business. So what was to come next for Nigel then?
Well, I was 53. The kids were 13 and at school. And what we'd done over the years, and the reason I was able to fund the business back in the 80s was because I had a small portfolio of properties which I could mortgage. When we built the stores, we built an OpCo and a PropCo.
Okay.
So we owned a lot of the properties that we traded from. So when I sold the business, I sold the operating part of the business, but Tesco then became our tenants. So we were left with whatever proceeds from the business, but also had this property company that was bringing in a decent amount of rent.
You were self-managing that, presumably?
Yeah, we were self-managing that. So it was a year of trying to decompress after 14 months in lawyers' offices, so that was useful. I was looking around. We'd also had a small chain of hotels in the Lake District. So we still had one, which was the Trout Hotel in Cockermouth. And I was looking around. Fortunately, back in 2002, I was one of the founding members of the Entrepreneurs Forum. And in 2010, they asked if I'd become the chairman. and the forum had a big turnaround ahead of it because the elected government in 2010 had disbanded the regional development companies, One Northeast. The forum's 75% of the forum's income was from One Northeast. So I became the chairman of a fabulous organization, networking organization that suddenly lost 75% of its funding. So that was interesting. So that sort of bridged a little bit of a gap between selling the main business and finding something else. And I really enjoyed that. I had 6 years as chairman. We went through that transition, and the forum went from strength to strength. And I learned a lot from the conferences, from the meetings that we used to host. And so that helped my self-development as well.
Yeah.
I was becoming engrossed in that. So, and a plug for the Entrepreneurs Forum, if anybody's looking for a network and looking for mentors, it's a great organization to join. So I read that a guy called Paul Curry had got planning consent to build a whiskey distillery in Cockermouth near our hotel. So I thought, oh, good, they'll have tourists, and we've got a hotel, so we can take advantage of that. So I rang him up, met him. He loved the hotel. He wanted to work. So I said to him, when are you going to build this whiskey distillery? And he said, well, I haven't got any money. All my funding's disappeared. I said, oh, okay. So I thought, well, during my time in convenience stores, I'd watched how the world of wine had changed. So you had New World wine, New Zealand, Australian, Chilean, Peru. Basically take the best of the old processes, simplify the labeling. So if it's Sauvignon Blanc, if it's Sauvignon Blanc on the label. And New World wine had sort of leapfrogged Old World wine and become the biggest producers in the world. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I thought the same was going to happen to whiskey. You would end up with New World whiskey. And this was English whiskey because we're in England. Paul's father had been the managing director of Chivas Brothers. They had built the Arran distillery in 95. They had been exited from the business because of change in funding and what have you. But so I thought, oh, this is really interesting. And I built a business model that was based on tourism because in the lakes. So we had a fantastic bistro, and Terry Laybourne came along and helped and was fantastic in terms of developing that. We had tourism. We had gin and vodka that we sold because you can distill those and bottle them and sell them within weeks as opposed to whiskey, which takes years. We set up an internet business direct to the consumer and so on and so forth. And I thought that we could create a great English whiskey. And because it was English, everybody would buy it because it's different and so on and so forth. But before I jumped in, I asked the late John Wall, who was chairman of the Prince's Trust, as it was at the time, if he knew anybody in whiskey. And he did. And he put me in touch with a guy called Dr. Alan Rutherford, who is one of the world's leading experts on the Scotch whiskey industry. He was in charge of production at Diageo in the 90s. He retired in 2000. And since then, he'd been consultant in the whiskey industry, not just there, but also around the world. And he had just moved back from Scotland to Northumberland. So I sent him the business plan. He said, it's really good. There's lots of different income streams. Whiskey's the long game. And I rang him up and said, yes, but it's English whiskey. And he said, well, there's a change coming. This New World whiskey is coming. I thought, oh, that's good. So then I said to him, well, if you're so sure, would you become our chairman and help me? And he said, yes. So all of a sudden, I had a guy with a global reputation in whiskey as our chairman. I had Paul, who'd had a lifetime working in whiskey, predominantly sales abroad. And so therefore we had some key components to put together. And off we set to raise money through SEIS and EIS, which was familiar, to build an English single malt whiskey distillery.
Wow. And in terms of the Lakes Distillery today, what does the business now look like, Nigel, for our viewers who perhaps don't have that knowledge?
Yeah. Well, over 12 years, we raised £6 million to build and develop it. We were winning silver and bronze medals for our spirits. At that time, it was gin and vodka, which we didn't like because we set out to do more than that. We changed our vision and our strategy, and that comes back to what I learned from the first big business, to create a global luxury whiskey brand. I said to Alan, what do I need to do that? He said, you need a very talented whiskey maker. Through Alan's connections, we ended up with a guy called Davil Gandhi, who was passionate about whiskey. He had been employed by Macallan for 2.5 years on constructing casks, because 60-70% of the flavor and the color of whiskey comes from the wood. So if you can make the wood as good as it possibly can be and marry with the spirit, you end up with an incredible whiskey. He joined us in 2017. We also then employed some very talented marketeers who changed our bottle design and packaging and brand message. And we tried to IPO the business to raise money. Didn't do that. Raised money off market. Walked into COVID, which nearly bust us. Won the world's best single malt whiskey award in 2022 when we beat 25 other countries in a blind tasting event.
Wow.
Actually, we won it twice because we won it and they said, no, can't be English. So they sent the samples out again and we won it the second time. So they gave us that award. Raised lots of money, developed the business, had a really talented team, and top and the bottom of it, in June 24, we sold it to Night Timber, sparkling wine for £71 million.
Incredible.
Yeah, it was incredible. Yeah,
What a journey. And it's been fascinating to hear two things, Nigel. The first thing is the importance of bringing people who have ability, experience, and a joint vision together. Point being, you wouldn't have been able to create the successful business that you have done in the Lakes Distillery without all of the individuals you've kindly just referenced. I think the other thing is, even though it's a completely different business to the convenience store / news agency business, actually a lot of the things that were important in that business have been important, of course, in the Lakes Distillery. Point being, it's amazing how these lessons in business can be applied in many different businesses and sectors.
And the multiple income streams was based on cash flow, which is absolutely key in any business. If you've got cash flow, you can survive. If you haven't, you're dead. And, what we did from the very beginning is that I wanted to create something exceptional, because I built other businesses. And so from day one, we did everything to a very, very high standard, both in terms of the people, the premises, the place, everything. And, that collection of people that we put together, there were mavericks in there. There were people difficult to get on with. I guess I was difficult to get on with at certain times, especially when you're facing, going bust, which we did 3 times. But it all turned out really, really well in the end, and it wouldn't have turned out that way without that group of people.
Totally. Sort of, if you now reflect on not only the very successful Lakes Distillery journey, but also Mills convenience stores, what would you say on reflection, Nigel, is the one thing that you have on reflection learned?
Yeah, it's and I wrote about it in the Entrepreneurs Forum newsletter this month. It's about the difference between a CEO and an MD. And if you want to scale a business, you need both. And the CEO's job is to develop the strategy, is to develop the mission and the vision, and to develop the key objectives, and to make sure that when you're scaling a business, you're adding value and you're not doing it because you think it's a nice thing to do. And the other thing is to bring the team with you.
Yes.
And if you have that vision and mission and key objectives, and you work with your team on jointly building that and agreeing on it, you will be more successful.
And can I ask, because a lot of our viewers today might be founders of successful businesses, Nigel, and they may be today the CEO, the MD, the chief bottle washer etc., because they might feel they don't have the resources or perhaps the network to identify some of the key individuals that you've depended on to create the success you have. What would you say to that person?
Well, you're not going to go very far.
Mm.
You're not going to go much further than you already are, because, one man or woman there's only 24 hours in a day,
Yes.
and there's only so much you can do. So to scale your business, you have to broaden that base. You have to bring more people in. And if you bring the right people in, they're not a cost, they actually add value to the business. And that's a really difficult thing to do, because, I've made lots of mistakes in terms of employing people. So for instance, in the whiskey business, we employed people who had come from Diageo, from Pernod Ricard and what have you. And you think that they're going to suddenly open the door and, generate sales. But then you realize, actually, when they don't, the reason they don't do that is because when they work for Pernod or Ricard or Diageo, they were actually part of a well-oiled machine.
Yes.
So they weren't developing business, they were maintaining the status quo. So when you suddenly throw them into a development role, they're lost. They're absolutely lost, because they haven't got the might of the brand behind them.
Yes.
But without the right people in your team, you will not go very far, sadly. And, I also used to get frustrated with taking time, with strategy and all the rest of it. But actually, it's the best time you can spend, because it means that your efforts are being channeled in the right direction, and it's not just a scattergun approach to trying to build a business or scale a business or whatever. So it's a hard thing to do. It's a mindset, and you've got to make your mind up whether you want to grow the business or whether you want to just have a lifestyle business. And if you want a lifestyle business, nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with it at all. But if you really want to scale the business, you need help.
Yes. And obviously, at the beginning of the podcast, Nigel, you talked a little bit about when you were at Pricewaterhouse and the decision you made to resign from a role within a business you thoroughly enjoyed to buy a small, perhaps underperforming for the reasons you highlighted earlier, small news agency business. If there's anyone watching this podcast who could be in that same predicament but doesn't have the confidence, doesn't have the financial means, and perhaps is relying on their income, therefore can't just resign in the hope that what comes next will help them pay their mortgage or help them, support their family. But what advice would you give that person? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people with that itch that have yet to scratch it.
Well, it comes back to the point you've just made about bringing people in around you who share a common purpose and can help you build that business. So you may find that you are, financially constrained or have responsibilities that would preclude you from suddenly stop this and doing this. So don't do that. Stay where you are, but put together a group of people, the key people that you need to deliver. Look at how you can collectively pool your resources to start this business, whatever it is, and then adopt a crawl, walk, run strategy, whereby you develop the business model whilst you're also working for other people. You fully develop it. And because one of the things that many people do is that they have an idea, and I've done the same. You have an idea, you go full tilt at it, but you find actually that's not going to work. I need to do this, or I need to do this. Well, if you can avoid wasting time, energy, and resources going here and then doing a U-turn to go there, at this point, by talking with others, by talking through your strategy, what are the risks, what are the benefits, you can actually get there. Takes you a little bit longer, but you'll have more certainty of delivering on success. That certainty, or that increase in confidence, plus working with others, may give you the opportunity then to let that life raft go and pursue your passion or your dream.
Yes. My last question for today, which I must ask, is obviously there's a lot that you'll look back on with pride, with excitement, with frustration perhaps as well. Let me ask, What's the one thing that you would hope, Nigel, that everyone you have employed, everyone that you've secured investment from, or everyone that you've been in business with would say about you? So if I was to ask those stakeholders, tell me about Nigel Mills, what's the one thing you would hope they would all unanimously say?
I put 110% effort into delivering on my promises. And I'm very fortunate. The businesses that we've sold have gone to a good home. And everybody within those businesses, if they wanted a job, they had a job.
Yeah.
The convenience stores, they all got a pay rise when they were employed by Tesco, because Tesco nationally paid a better rate than us. We have always treated people with respect.
Yeah.
But I think the key thing is that we tried to deliver on our promises. We've been very fortunate that we've exited successfully several times. Most people made money. Some people lost a little bit of money, those that came into the deal later on. But when I've spoken to them, what they've all said is that we're just incredibly proud to have been part of the journey and to have, to be part of the journey. So there will be people out there with negative views of what we've achieved, but the majority of people I've spoken to have said that you've done a great job.
Well, I think a lot of the things you pointed to there are not only important to me, but I think things like respect, things like delivering on your promises are things that I assume, albeit you can't assume in business. Nigel, huge thanks for joining me today.
And one thing, thank Lee. One thing that just to mention is that, if you're the CEO, if you're the founder, you're the only one that gets the job done. So you can rely on your team, you've got a team and all the rest of it, but without your grit, determination, and persistence, it won't happen.
Yes.
So don't forget that.
No, I think that's a really good takeaway for anyone watching who is that founder CEO who has a big ambition, because for sure the one thing they're going to need to have is absolute persistency and an ability to dig deep, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nigel, huge thanks for joining me on my podcast today. It's been a really insightful, inspiring conversation, so I'm really grateful for your time.
No, I'm delighted to be able to contribute. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. It's been an absolute pleasure today to have Nigel Mills on my Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcast. It was really interesting to understand a little bit more about why Nigel decided, as a newly qualified chartered accountant with PW, to resign to buy a small northeast-based independent news agency business, which he scaled and sold to Tesco PLC for millions of pounds. It was really interesting to understand how Nigel funded the acquisition of that business, and of course he relied on not only his immediate family, but also was willing to put the house on red in pursuit of buying and ultimately finding himself the owner of his first business at a very young age of mid-20s. Since selling his news agency business to Tesco, Nigel has gone on to invest in, scale, and in turn sell a number of other businesses, including the Lake Distillery, which was sold to Nye Timber only last year for £70-odd million. I think the things that I was able to take away from the podcast today with Nigel certainly is all around the importance of having A-grade individuals around you as you look to set up and scale up your business. Nigel specifically mentioned that for sure, an individual alone will never scale a business. It's essential that you bring in the expertise, the knowledge, and perhaps the perspectives of others who've been there, have knowledge and skills perhaps you do not have, because of course, 2 and 2 often does equal 6. It was really interesting to understand a bit more about perhaps some of the challenges Nigel faced as he looked to scale his news agency business, having to continually reinvent the business as a consequence of government legislation, changes in market dynamic and conditions, and of course the competitive landscape. Point being, nothing is permanent, everything changes, and actually those that succeed are those that are always one step ahead of not only their competitors, but their peer group. Nigel's very articulate mind, I think, is the thing that has allowed Nigel to identify opportunity, to put in place a clear plan to exploit the opportunity. And of course, with the addition of great individuals, I suspect what you have there is a business that is only destined to succeed. Nigel obviously is a very considered, very thought-provoking, very respectful individual, and it's quite clear that he puts people first, which again perhaps is why he has achieved the success he has. For me, the final key takeaway from this podcast is the importance of pursuing your dream. I think back when Nigel first joined Pricewaterhouse, he knew then he wanted to run a business. And because of his family having previously operated a news agency business, of course it made sense for his first venture to be in a sector that he and his family knew. Since then, each opportunity that he's decided to exploit and take advantage of has been in a sector where he's had a genuine interest. And I think loving the business you're building is so important if it is to be successful. You have been watching Confessions of an Entrepreneur powered by RG. If you would like to download this or any other podcast in our Confessions of a series, then please do so from wherever you download your podcasts. But for now, I'm super grateful for you joining us to watch this podcast, and I look forward to seeing you on future Confessions of a podcast.